We've had a slight change of personnel in that Lord Lamont is now sitting in for Sir Malcolm Rifkind to handle the Brexit scenario. And the very simple basis to thinking through this simulation is that there has been a vote now, as opposed to this morning when we were negotiating the terms of the vote. Now there has been a vote, and the British people have voted to leave. And so in the aftermath of that, as I said this morning, a bit like dating when you're fighting over the used stereo, we have to now renegotiate what's left between us and see how we move forward. But we have to do so, obviously, in a period where there is real political acrimony as a result of this. And speaking as a historian, human beings' feelings do matter. They may not be broad historical forces, but the fact that Bobby Kennedy and LBJ hated each other did matter for Vietnam policy. You have to work that out. And so we will have to navigate that, as well as the specifics. And so to begin, I'd like to turn it over to Lord Lamont to make an opening statement. Then we'll have your responses to this statement, and then Lord Lamont will have a chance in the end to comment on those issues. Over to you, sir.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, well, clearly the last session completely failed because we've had Brexit. But here we are. I thought I was, not that there's been a coup, but I thought I was standing in for David Cameron, not Sir Malcolm Rifkind. We are here to discuss what would be, or what is, Britain's relationship with the EU after the UK referendum. I appreciate that many people in this room will be disappointed, but we all, including we ministers in the British government, have to respect the decision. And many people in the British government campaigned for Britain to remain in. But it is a democratic decision arrived at by a clear majority. I would like to stress that this outcome does not mean that Britain is turning its back, either economically or politically, on Europe. I take the point that was made by Mr. Letta about you're in or you're out, but also he made the point about different circles. I think there are many areas where we will hope to continue to cooperate. I will come on to some of those in the discussion to do with foreign policy, science, universities, and of course, commerce. The past of Britain is tied up with Europe, and the future inevitably will be as well. I note that Article 8 of the TUE requires the EU to develop a special relationship with neighbouring areas. I think that would be an obligation on the EU even if there were no Article 8. And I'm sure that people are not today going to express irritation or anger that members of the people in the UK have voted as they do. It would be ironic if the EU, an organisation that exists to produce good relations internationally, should not be also anxious to have good relations still with its neighbour, the UK. I'm happy to conduct the negotiations under Article 50. Some people suggested to me that perhaps we might avoid Article 50, and although I'm convinced that that is legally possible, I don't think that that would have been welcomed round the table. This negotiation, of course, is going to take a long time. It's not going to be fixed in one meeting this afternoon. My belief is that the vote in the UK was triggered by a desire to have more control over our own lawmaking, and also I believe that the migration crisis and the great upsurge in immigration we've had in Britain in recent years probably, but who knows with the mysterious chemistry of the electorate how it worked, but that's what I believe. I do not believe that membership of the EEA, were we to apply for that, would be ideal for the UK. I'm not entirely convinced by all the slogans about government by fax. I note that the EU has an elaborate comitology structure on its website, which I can't believe means nothing. But be that as it may, I don't believe that the EEA would be the right route for Britain. Nor do I think the Swiss option would be correct. It is something that was incredibly complex. 20 principal accords, 100 supplementary accords. It took a decade to negotiate. And again, I think that would not really be appropriate for us. I think if we are to reach an accommodation that works, we need to put something in place that works better for all concerned, that needs to be different from anything that we've had in the past. The best solution that we can see would be a comprehensive free trade agreement, in some ways similar to that seen between Canada and the EU, although I think in certain respects it would be different. When we come to agreement covering manufactures and goods, I would hope that that would be relatively easy. The example of CETA, the Canadian agreement, ultimately eliminates 100% of tariffs on industrial products, and I think that we ought to be able to achieve, hopefully, something similar for the UK and the EU together. But I don't think it is entirely appropriate or fair to separate out goods, financial services, and agriculture. Yes, they are separate, but they are also linked. And I think our attitude towards an agreement will be on each of them on its merits, but they will be linked issues. Britain, of course, as everybody knows, runs a trade deficit in manufactures. With the EU, it runs a surplus in financial services. That surplus in financial services is about the same as the deficit in food and agriculture. So there is an obvious linkage there. I know the moment I mention deficits, people will say, but mathematically as a proportion of EU GDP, it matters less to the EU than it does to the UK. You don't have any leverage because you have this large deficit in manufactures. I don't entirely buy that. The UK is the EU's largest trading partner in goods. The UK is Germany's largest trading partner and is the largest market for German cars. On agriculture, we could have various options. We could have a free trade agreement, leaving agriculture largely as it is, or we could have not a free trade agreement and we could impose some tariffs on EU goods where we're not able to reach agreement on other issues. Other issues, of course, specifically includes financial services, and we would seek to have a financial services chapter in our FTA. And it would seek to ensure that the UK was not considered just another third country, but could get as close to EEA access as possible, that is, access to the single market in financial services. Of course, as Mr. De Gucht knows better than anyone else in this room, issues arise over regulation, particularly the future of regulation, the future of regulations. Of course, we start off from a point where we're almost entirely in the same regulatory system. We have the acquis communautaire. I would hope that given that present situation, there'd be no question of our system of regulation in the UK not being judged equivalent, a strong argument for passporting itself. But there then is the issue of future regulation, which again, as Mr. De Gucht knows, been a big issue and was a big issue, I think, in TTIP as well. And I think progress wasn't made very far on TTIP. But I remember Lord Mandelson telling me that what he felt should happen with financial regulation with the United States, given that they are not in the position we're in today, which is to be equivalent and very closely in line, there has to be a machinery for convergence for the future. Whether this is a body organized along the lines of investor dispute settlement mechanisms, I think it would be something different, because it would be doing with regulation rather than investment, but it would be a body to see that in future alterations in our regulation, which is very similar at the moment, they were complementary to each other. Of course, the ECB and the Bank of England already cooperate very closely, and the UK will to continue to cooperate in bodies like the Financial Stability Board and those responsible for setting up the Basel mechanisms. Of course, the City of London is a very important UK interest, but I think it is also something that matters to the individual countries of the EU. There are 75 banks, which are EEA banks, which have passported into London, including Deutsche Bank with 8,000 employees in London. There are 800 insurance firms in the EEA which could passport into the UK. We are confident London, for many reasons, will remain a major financial centre, but obviously we would wish to continue the very close links with Europe as well. One of the issues in the referendum was greater control of over our borders. We would seek to introduce legislation to that effect. We would be willing to explore a number of options on that front. If we had our own system, perhaps a point system, we could seek to give a bias towards EU nationals within that system. An alternative would be the emergency brake, but given the emergency brake ran into difficulty in the previous negotiations, there is quite a lot to be said for a system that did allow some preferential entry for EU nationals. We recognize that in this new situation, notwithstanding that we will be outside the CAP, notwithstanding that we will be outside the regional policy of the EU, we will be expected to make some budget contribution. This is an important point because obviously with the departure of the UK, the burden that falls on other European countries is not inconsiderable. I think I'm right in saying after allowing for the rebate, Germany would be required to increase its contribution in the absence of any contribution from Britain by about £4 billion, France by 2.9 billion, Italy by 2.1, Spain by 1.5. But we recognize that in putting forward what we would like to have, it is probably right that we would have to make a budget contribution. Another area where we believe cooperation would be possible is very much, and we would like this, in foreign affairs and security. Obviously, geographically, historically, Britain and Europe are close together. They face similar threats in the world. Notwithstanding the verdict of the referendum, we would like to continue in some form. Perhaps we could work on separate negotiations about ways in which Britain could contribute to the common security and foreign policy. The objectives that we have sought in our renegotiation, and which I think the referendum was about, are not really to do with security and defence, which I think is a matter of common interest where we could find a way of working together. And we would hope that it would be recognised that Britain, with its position on international bodies and with its foreign policy cooperation, would be able to contribute something very special to Europe. To sum up, what we would seek would be a comprehensive agreement, but one that would cover all interlinked goods, financial services, and agriculture. We recognize we would have to make a budget contribution. This, I realize, is going to be a very difficult negotiation. As I said, I don't expect we're going to make a lot of progress in one single afternoon. It is special and different from what has gone before. I appreciate that many people are disappointed with the decision Britain has made, though many people may be relieved. You won't have an awkward partner gumming up the works and objecting to everything all the time. Britain needs a close relationship with the EU, and I believe that the EU ought to have a close relationship with an important neighbor as well. People as different as Jacques Delors and Mr. Schäuble have said that Britain could negotiate a special relationship different from other countries with the EU. I believe that this is important very much for ourselves, but also for the wider interests of Europe. I hope that we can move forward to discussions without acrimony in a constructive way. I don't doubt it will be a difficult negotiation, but I believe in the end we ought to be able to reach an agreement with each other.
Thank you, Lord Lamont, and especially thank you for giving us a comprehensive, specific list to begin to look at. And I'd like, before we open it up to the floor, to point out a few of those key points. It was opted a Canadian-type option, which is clear, rather than other options, which ought to help us narrow the discussion. You mentioned, I thought very interestingly, that there might be a budget contribution as this process goes along still, which is, I thought, an interesting point to throw out. And foreign affairs is a very interesting point, because CFSP, with NATO already existing, that's a very interesting, being as an American, suddenly, wow, that's an interesting point. How do you link that together in this comprehensive package which is put forward, and also linking agriculture, goods and services together, and to reach some sort of coherent full deal? I mean, and as you say, this will obviously take a while. The EU estimates 2 years. I think most of us know that's wishful thinking, and it would take longer. And on that note, let's begin. Does anyone have anything to say broadly about that deal? Yes, we'll start here.
No.
We'll start with France and Germany, and we'll argue about who goes first.
Well, I've just a point about the Canadian model, the CETA. But what you said has nothing to do with the CETA, because the CETA, the trade agreement between the EU and Canada, which has just been finalized, but it's not yet in force, and the French are very much in favor of its being enforced rather quickly. But it has nothing to do with what you say, because you ask for the financial passport, which is completely contrary to the Fidium case law of the court. Yes. So that, and it's a German preliminary ruling, where if you have not your principal establishment in Europe, you don't have.
Canada, it was similar in industrial goods.
Yeah. And also you ask for the free movement of people and preferential entry. So it's another model. What Jacques Delors meant when he said a special relationship has to do with Schengen, with the euro, etc. at the time where the opt-outs of the UK were perfectly accepted. Okay. But in that case, I don't know what France's viewpoint, because I'm not mandated to say anything because there is no Brexit yet. But my view is that we would agree with the Canadian model, that is to say, a completely banal trade agreement with the UK, but nothing else if you are out, I think.
We're going to gather a bunch of these and let Lord Lamont respond.
First of all,
yes, Germany, you're on the list.
The protocol after your speech shall note silence and strong breath. First of all, Sir Norman, we respect the decision of the British people. It is, democracy is a complicated thing, has an outcome sometimes some like and some do disagree. So we respect the decision made for Brexit. This is a fact we now have to realize, and we now have to draw the conclusion. Every decision has consequences. And those who decide probably have taken that into consideration. And after we had 4 or 5 heads of state meeting on Brexit, and we finally didn't get a deal, which is the assumption of this working session, I must say we're disappointed. We respect, but we're disappointed, and we're not so keen. After you showed us any torture instruments, to hug you with a very warm welcome in this debate. So. We have to respect something which we do not like. We will keep on with good relationship, but I don't believe that your cherry-picking approach you're presenting around the table will be presentable to our constituents, to our population. This is not just only one democracy. In Europe, there are several ones. And everybody has, if we go on with the negotiation, to not just find an agreement around this table, but with his electorate. And for example, if I take your free trade issue, actually, it is nothing which is easy to gain. As you know, how long we negotiated CETA from the European Commission. Karel can say even more details, or TTIP. And what's about with TTIP and CETA among our electorate? It's not easy what you're gaining from us. And I'm not quite sure whether I can impress my Frankfurt electorate that if there's the one and only chance after your Brexit exit to compete with London as the leading financial sector, would you ask me to make an arrangement with the UK government now, very soon, that gives you a free entry card to the European financial market, which would be seen as a competitive disadvantage from the status quo we are aiming at? This cannot be a serious option in our negotiation. And I'm disappointed on number 3 that you haven't said much realistic on the foreign policy. We are facing serious crises all over the world, and Europe is a global player, the one and only. It's not the UK alone, it's not France alone, it's not Spain alone or Germany, it is the European Union. So how shall we organize our relationship in foreign and security policies, the collaboration between the EU and NATO and all this other stuff? This shall be taken into consideration because our electorate is now asking if there's no such thing as a free lunch. Brexit is something which does, as we all know, does not only affect you, but affects our electorate. And this proposal, which is not on the table, which I would call the cherry-picking proposal after torturing us over months, is not acceptable.
Very well played. Over to the Netherlands and then Spain.
Well, I completely agree with France and Germany. It's from the Netherlands, although I have to be even more disappointed because the future of the Netherlands is very much related with the future of our neighbors and with the UK, France, and Germany as our bigger neighbors, and Belgium and Luxembourg as our, the Benelux is a close entity. But when these bigger neighbors are not in agreement, that's not very good for us. But we have also to count in some losses. We will have some job losses, we will have some trade losses, etc. Of course, only 10% of what you are losing, but we will be disappointed about that. I represent the Netherlands here, but I work in the Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany. We did this Brexit potential economic consequences, and it is devastating. Thousands of jobs, etc. So what we will do, I think, is we will listen seriously to what you discuss, but we have to get our act together, and we have to make a close round along our businesses to see what are the real interests, because we're somewhere we start from there. So the love is not gone, but there is a kind of awkward situation that the one you love is leaving you, and that comes with a lot of irrational, in normal life, with a lot of irrational.
But others love you too.
Thank you.
And suddenly we're in a French film.
I'm not hiding my disappointment.
So Norman put Europe together.
So we see also beside that, we see some chances because we are for sure also. We note that the world will take you so much less serious, that the potential of Amsterdam to become, together with Frankfurt, the financial capital of Europe raise, and also the headquarters for all kind of international companies in Amsterdam So this is a chance, and of course, on the short term, we also will welcome Scotland in the European Union. This is really something that we will do, and we will make sure that the differences between the economic growth
in the euro,
Scotland. Even so, what we will see is we will see the prosperity of Scotland go high, and we will make sure that we will set everything there to have in 10 years from now. We can campaign together with you for coming into the European Union. The estimate is that the effects of leaving the European Union are at its highest after 10 years. So that would be the deepest moment on which we can campaign for you to come back in. I'm very disappointed, but I have good hope for my children.
And with the love gone, we're going to go to Spain and then Sweden.
Well, first, I do agree with whatever has been said before me, and I will try to add a couple of comments. The first is that I'm surprised, Mr. Lamont, that the only mention that you have done from the reaction was a kind of fear of retaliatory measures. No, I mean, first, we have to understand that the European Union will be a very different ensemble without Great Britain. So, don't speak ceteris paribus, because there is no ceteris paribus here, and understand that. Second, we are bound by our public opinions, and you have discarded the systems that are around that could be more easily explainable, the European Economic Area or the Swiss agreement. But you don't want that. You want a special, better one that just takes the best of the clear bilateral trade agreements with some perks. But frankly, if you want access to the internal market, I think that you will understand first that this will create reactions by the spare parts producers in Spain or by the car makers in Germany, and something of the like all over and you have to understand that this is not retaliatory. This is democracy. The same way that I hope we will never be confronted to that, but we would respect your decision. You have to respect our decisions, and our decision will be along these lines. This will be so. Tell your citizens it's not going to be as now, but just us being Canada, but better. No, not at all. This will not work like that, and it's not retaliation at all. We want Great Britain to stay in with all the modulations that we have discussed this morning. But exit is not the solution, and if you have exited, then think coming back, because if not, there will be parts of the now, of Scotland, for instance, that will do it, first step.
Before we move on to Sweden and Poland, just a question to Spain that's been put in my ear, and then you can start answering, and then we'll give you the next round, and that's fine. Will this affect Catalonia in any way? What's going on there?
You were out now. You were not in control of the debate anymore.
Frankly, Brexit in itself,
yeah.
No.
Okay.
The consequences after Brexit, which I hope will never happen in the first place, we will see.
Okay. Thank you. We're gonna go to Sweden, Poland, and then let Lord Lamont start answering, and then we'll ask some more. There's plenty of time. But Sweden and then Poland, then we'll have you come in, and then there'll be more.
Okay.
Sweden?
Okay. Even though I'm extremely sad, I would try to behave and be polite and start with that we respect your referendum. But then I must admit that this is something that will make many, many, many Swedes very upset. It is, as I said before, a public divorce. You were our best friend, and we had a marriage. Now we are divorced. And that means that we need to think about this for a while and to recover. And for the first, I never thought I was going to mention this, but the word reciprocity, used rather often in the European Union, which Swedes don't like. Now I think that it's time for some reciprocity. not doing just a cherry-picking approach, as Germany said that it was, and I agree, really agree with them. And I believe also that even though you think that you can have both goods, you can have agriculture, you can have financial services, and you can cooperate together with us when it comes to foreign policy, defense, and security, and so on. Yes, but it will take some time. As you very well know, we have limited resources when it comes to the Commission to negotiate with when it comes to different FTAs, for example, and for the European Union. And for us, the priority for the moment is the TTIP and the CETA, to finish up that. We also have an ongoing thing with Japan. We have an old one with GCC, and many other topics that we need to spend resources on. So you cannot count on that the first day out you should be very close to coming in again, because that's what you suggest. I think that you need to realize that it will take some time. It will take long time. And I would also like to put a question. What are you going to tell your business community? Because they desperately wanted to stay within the European Union. For them, it will be very tough.
All right, we'll have Poland and then let Lord Lamont answer, and then Ireland and EU institutions after that. Okay, the floor is yours, Poland.
Brexit is not only about hard feelings, even though hard feelings matter in the electorate and they influence the positions of the politicians. But Brexit is very much about strategy. And it is in the vital interest of Poland that European Union remains cohesive. So that other countries which would like to emulate what Britain did would be deterred. And we are very much for the deterrence, because we are very much for the cohesion of European Union, and we would never support any agreement which would be better than the one for Norway or Switzerland.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, we had a number of people saying they respected our decision, but the moment after they'd taken a breath and said they respected our decision, there seemed to be a certain underhand, seething, not very well concealed dislike of the decision that had been made. And I'm very grateful to our Spanish colleague for saying she thought we should maybe come back. In fact, I'm not sure that wasn't said several times, but I took seriously what was said before, that out is out, and there's no sort of halfway house. At the same time, we have to negotiate a relationship. We have the fallback, obviously, of the WTO regime, the MFN regime, which is the same that many countries have with the EU. The United States has with the EU, Japan has with the EU. People who sell very successfully into the single market do, governed by the rules of MFN and the WTO. We were just arguing that since we have to negotiate, we have to unscramble a lot of things that exist already. Obviously, there is a negotiation. Our colleague from Sweden referred to the fact that we were married and now we've got divorced. Well, I think many people would agree that the best form of divorce is an amicable divorce, and the children like it when the parents remain on very good terms. And
They will in the long run.
a divorce where people don't talk to each other is a very acrimonious and very. Of course, it allows for lots of relationships.
We didn't ask for a referendum.
But it does. I think, work for the greater good, the greater public interest, if we have good relations between us. Now, I think the great danger in this situation is of going down a retaliatory cycle. And I was accused of cherry picking. I wasn't cherry picking. I was seeking to link the different sectors together into a comprehensive whole. But people are saying, oh no, you can have access, you can't have access to this, you can't have access to that. I could reply by equally saying, you will not have access to this. I was very surprised at our German colleague saying he wasn't sure he could sell this to the German electorate. Germany is a massive exporter to Britain. Britain is the largest purchaser of German cars, the largest export market for Germany. When you say, what are British businessmen going to think about this? What on earth are German businessmen? Manufacturing is a far more important element in the German economy than it is in the UK economy. I think that the most important thing to avoid is going down this road of competitive retaliation. I don't believe that is common sense. I don't believe that is what Europe should be about, and it's not in the interests of Europe or the UK.
Ireland, then the EU institutions, then Germany.
Well, I think we've got to clarify under what legal instrument this discussion is going to take place. If it is under Article 50, that is a time-limited negotiation. It must be over within 2 years. And if the time limit is to be extended, it can only be extended by unanimous agreement of all of the member states. And we in Ireland foresee difficulties in this, because there will be some countries who will not be happy with some aspect of what Britain is looking for, who will perhaps threaten to withhold their consent to an extension. So we do face the possibility of a situation where the negotiation has not been settled and Britain is willy-nilly overnight out of the European Union with no agreement. And that could be even more disruptive than a normal, orderly leaving of the European Union by Britain. We also would stress that, if you like, if it's a negotiation under Article 50, that is one where the European Council is in the driving seat. But if it is to be a negotiation of a trade agreement, that's a matter for the European Commission. And the European Commission is in the driving seat as far as any trade negotiation is concerned. And it seems to me that separating those two responsibilities is going to be quite complex. I know that one of the things that in British public opinion causes, and we've seen it in the referendum campaign, form of unhappiness, is what is perceived as the excessive influence of the European Commission. Well, if you're going to negotiate a trade agreement, you are opting for much more influence by the European Commission and less influence by the member states, including ourselves, on this. As far as Ireland is concerned, I want to make it clear that this is an absolutely devastating decision that Britain has taken. We regard it as an unfriendly act. Yeah. I have invested, I speak personally, most of my political career in building a structure of peace in Ireland, reconciling two communities that live on the island who have entirely different allegiances. And now, for entirely domestic purposes on the island of Britain, the British people have left the European Union and thereby created a structure of instability on the island of Ireland. No country will suffer as much from this decision that you've taken as Ireland. And I have to address my colleagues here at the table to recognise this. We're going to suffer from this far more than any of you are around this table. So we will be looking for special consideration of our position as far as this is concerned.
It's confirmed here you have almost the same economic consequences as UK.
It is enormous for us. And we will, we won't be entertaining certain requests that might be made about tax policy in Ireland. We will pay no attention to them, I can assure you, because we're in a situation where we have to deal with this huge self-imposed, politically generated shock to our economy as a result of a succession of events that were unleashed by a decision of the British government. And we are not going to tolerate a long period of uncertainty here. A long negotiation is not tolerable to us. This matter has to be settled quickly. I also will say that we will want assurances from Britain about access for all our agricultural products to the British market without any of the sort of discrimination against Irish exports that we had to experience before we joined the European Union, where Britain was paying deficiency payments to its own farmers, thereby enabling them to undercut Irish farmers on the British market. We'll be insisting on complete access to the British market for our agricultural products from day one. We also will, I can tell you, be looking to see that as much as possible of the financial services market serving the European Union that's currently in London is relocated in Ireland or in other countries that are English speaking in the European Union. Well, no, I'm slightly overstating the case there, but what I can tell you, we will be looking for as much as possible of what's now in London coming to Ireland. And we will be watching to see what Britain is prepared to offer us on other issues before we would mitigate our demands in this matter. And we will be expecting the Commission, to the extent that it's a trade agreement, to drive a very tough deal here on this, because we have been focusing in the debate up to now on the needs of Britain. In this negotiation, this second phase, it's going to be the needs of the other countries that are going to have to get priority in our consideration.
Lord Lamont, a brief response to this and then to the EU institutions. But
well, I asked if I could respond to John Bruton immediately. I recognize the force of what he feels, and obviously, although Britain couldn't make the British people couldn't make its decision based on Ireland, I entirely understand the strong feelings that he has about this. My mind went back to the speeches that Lloyd George made when the Irish Free State was recognised, and when Lloyd George introduced the provisions whereby people could travel freely to the UK without passports, whereby they could vote in UK elections, notwithstanding the tragic history of conflict that Britain had got involved in, notwithstanding what had happened in the recent past. Lloyd George made the special provisions for Ireland in recognition of the eternal friendship between the British people and the Irish peoples, and that is what we want to see continue. And it's very important, just as there shouldn't be acrimony between the EU and Britain over Britain's departure from the EU, it is equally important there should not be acrimony between Ireland and the UK. And one of the great things that has happened in my lifetime, not least thanks to people like John Bruton, has been that relations between Britain and the Republic of Ireland have improved enormously. So, John, please don't interpret this as an unfriendly act. It is an act which we recognise has huge consequences for Ireland, which we will wish to address. I think we would want to support the continuation of the passport zone, which I think other countries in the EU are unlikely to object to, although obviously there will be issues about how this works with free movement of labour. We would continue, obviously, visa-free travel with the EU, but the enforcement of people not staying in the UK doesn't really come at the border. It comes via other mechanisms such as access to social security, access to the job market, which wouldn't automatically be available to EU citizens. But I don't think there's any need for any greater border enforcement. If this is not sufficient, the best option would be enforce further border checks around the island, the total island of Ireland and Northern Ireland, rather than a border between the two, though of course there could be greater checks on airports and ports in Ireland on any flights going to the UK. Of course, quite apart from movements of people, there would also need to be a customs border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, but you already have that problem with Norway and Sweden, where they have a customs border. Customs checks are sporadic along the Norway-Sweden border. Cars are not usually forced to stop. Both countries emphasize checks against other countries. and trust each other to enforce the rules properly at their borders, something I think we could trust the Irish to do. On the issues you raised, obviously the agriculture issue would have to be in the context of what we negotiate generally as regards the EU and agriculture. As regards moving a lot of the City of London to Dublin, well, I hadn't noticed you hadn't been trying anyway, but no doubt you'll try again and try harder. But we've put down, you know, there's a lot of cooperation between the City of London and Dublin, a lot of related transactions, related companies, and we would foresee this and very much want this to continue. But going back to what John said at the beginning, the relationship with Ireland is of enormous importance to us, and it's enormously important to put behind us the legacy of history which John had done so much to banish. He also raised various other issues at the beginning about proceeding under Article 50. I thought everyone would be enormously pleased that I had just accepted to proceed under Article 50, which, as you say, is time limited to 2 years in theory. As you say, it requires unanimity, but I would have thought common sense and the influence of the big countries, and if we are not quite at an agreement after 2 years, I know we're not going to get it in the next 5 minutes, I would have hoped that at least common sense would allow us to continue. Both sides need an agreement.
EU institutions, and then Germany, and then Italy.
Well, what amazes me most in your answer, Mr. Lamont, is that even a very experienced politician, as you are, doesn't have the faintest idea what would happen if Brexit was decided. Because what you have been putting on the table, to put it bluntly, doesn't make sense. And let me go into a little bit of the details. You say, let's take CETA. I have been negotiating CETA, no? From the beginning to the end. And your countrymen would never be pleased with that, you know. Because it's true that for industrial products you get to zero over a period of 10 years, not immediately. But for example, on financial services, Canada, and we would be in the position of Canada in this negotiation, has reserved a lot of rights for itself. And they can invoke a prudential clause that puts an end to anything. So the whole idea that you could arrange the financial services through a CETA approach. No. Well, let me.
That's not what I suggested.
No, but that's what you have said. Because you have not. You have not.
It wasn't what I said.
No, you have not.
What I said was CETA in respect of industrial goods. That was what I said.
So even worse for your financial sector.
But CETA is not only about industrial goods. It's also about services. Yeah. It's about investment. Yeah. It's about agriculture. And all this is linked, you know. If you have a trade negotiation, you can not just pick out one chapter of it and say, look, that would be very nice for us, you know. And leave the rest to other kind of negotiations. Now, I think what you should realize is that also the WTO is not a solution. Because you say, look, if we don't find an agreement on CETA, we take WTO. You cannot simply take that because you have no tariffs. There are no tariffs in the WTO between Great Britain and the rest of Europe, with no country. We have a common external tariff. So vis-à-vis the WTO, we are in fact one structure, no? But inside the structure, there are no rights. There are no tariffs at all. So automatically you would have zero tariffs for everybody, from everybody and for everything. Now, that's, I think, really an illusion. So the whole idea we fall back on WTO doesn't work. Because there is no frame in WTO between Great Britain and the rest of Europe. We have exactly the same position. No? That would be, it would really be cherry picking. Now, what you have also to see is that, for example, in CETA, there's a lot of regulatory approximation. No? There are rules on public procurement that are, well, I think rather positive. And it will be much more difficult with the United States than it has been with Canada. So really looking at formulas that you cherry pick, yes, you certainly do cherry picking, no? Because you say, look, what is interesting in CETA, that's industrial goods. What would be interesting for financial services is that everything stays in London. No, that's an illusion. That's a real illusion. Yeah. You would have Frankfurt, but it's even a more general question. How can you expect that after you're leaving, the European economy would still be about the biggest in the world, that economy would accept that its financial center is outside its borders? How can you really expect somebody to accept that?
No.
And whether it's Ireland, whether it's Frankfurt, whether it's Amsterdam, why not Brussels? I mean, that's in the center. But I mean, this is an idea that has been raised by France several years ago.
Yes,
I remember
absolutely.
that they say, look, how can we have a financial center so eccentric to what the European Union is? Now, if you wouldn't be there anymore, I mean, how are you going to govern with agreements the financial structure of your own economy? I really cannot see that at all. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole idea of common and foreign and security policy. I have been surprised that you say, look, we should make a budgetary contribution. I mean, that was really amazing, because you would never do that for granted. I mean, then you would ask something for that, you know. I mean, the first thing you would have to do is to pay your own agricultural people, I think, if you leave the European Union, because that's what we are doing now. We are paying them, you know. Just as we are paying quite a lot of money to your universities. Huh? So you even would, if I understand it rightly, the idea is that you would spend more than you do now. I mean, that's not what happens that much in real world. Having said this, I could go into a lot more details. I'm amazed you don't have an idea what would happen. I think that nobody really has, but you wouldn't be in the position to find out what you're going to do. It would be on your plate and much less on ours, I believe, and I'm amazed that you don't have any real approach to that.
Germany and then Italy.
Sir Norman, you stated that some speeches, and you looked at me, reveal retaliation. That's wrong. After your decision, it's a shift of focus. Yep. This is something what is happening. You may feel that is a retaliation, but we have to refocus our policy. Until the negotiation failed, it was a common understanding that we find a common solution, being flexible, trying not to look on the national or the old-time interest, and trying to compromise. And we respect your decision, but now you have to respect that we are refocusing our efforts. We have, for example, you claim that may be a shock to other European economies. And we had the Irish example. That we think even more to help the Irish to get through this stuff. Yeah. Before we negotiate a free entry card for London financial services to the European Union, is a shift of focus. It has nothing to do with retaliation, but with the fact that they are in and you want to get out. That we have to assess what all our EU companies directly linked with the UK under the new legal structure. Do we need something to stabilize things? You know, capital is a very flexible thing. We don't know yet how the financial market will react on that decision. But will it influence our financial stability? We just made banking union and all the European supervisory mechanism, and we went through all this banking crisis stuff. And this is not a risk you can price. This is uncertainty, and the capital markets love risk, but they hate uncertainty. So we have to think about shock absorbing and all this stuff. From the legal point of view, Karel made some point. Don't feel retaliation, but see that any decision you have made have consequences on all of us. And first things first, we are member of the European Union. We want to keep in. We try to offer you a fair deal, and still you may join us. But now we have refocused our efforts, and this is something which you have to take into consideration, and this is something that we have focused on our efforts now. This is the reality of the consequence I revealed earlier of the decision you are explaining to us.
I take some more water.
Okay. Italy, please.
Yes, I think this part of the discussion is very instructive because it is exactly the consequence of the difference between in and out and the absolutely not possibility to have a gray zone in which you can be in and out, cherry picking. It is, I think, very, very interesting and very good. I would like to add one point. The point is about the difficulties, the cost of the divorce. Because for the divorce, there's a lot of people gaining a lot of money. All the people working for years and years after the divorce about the consequences, the legal consequences. And this is one of the things that it is, in my view, completely under-evaluated today. You are obliging us, all the European Union, to spend money, energies, a big investment in trying to arrange, and that will take years and years, the consequences of divorce. It will be a push for more red tape, I will say, because the consequences of this divorce will take years and years in our common work, and that is, in my view, one of the issues that is until now completely under-evaluated. A second point, I would say that I back completely the position raised by Germany and France and by the Commission and by the other colleagues. On trade, I would say that the position of my Swedish colleague was very good, and I would like to add one point. Today, after Brexit, our priority is not the agreement with the UK. We have another list of priorities, and you mentioned very correctly the fact that we are opening the discussion with Japan, Indonesia, Australia.
Vietnam.
Vietnam is
just concluded.
Just concluded.
Just concluded.
Yeah. So we have to reopen. We are reopening the negotiation with Mexico. It is another big important issue. So for us today, these are the key issues, and of course we are open to have a discussion with the UK, but it will be after these priorities. There are some concrete consequences on the financial system. I think the first one is that Italy will back the change, of course, of the seat of the European Banking Authority. Today is London. Why not Dublin? So we can just immediately move the authority, the European Banking Authority, to Dublin, just to say that we completely share the difficulty that Ireland is experiencing in this very period, and the fact that around all these topics there are big consequences. On foreign security policy, we are all members of NATO, so...
Not all.
Yes, okay, sorry. We are almost all members of NATO, so as we can have there our common work together. But of course, it will be a big problem for many issues, and the consequences would be very difficult. So I think at the end of the day, we are entering a period of long disease, problems, discussions. This period will be negative for the European competitiveness, for the UK competitiveness, because it will be a way to not to be attractive for foreign investments in the UK, in the rest of Europe. It will be, I think, very much difficult to continue like that. So it is clear that we will continue our discussions, but of course, being out and being in is a completely different thing, and I think it sounds very clear now.
France.
I just have to recall the expression of Churchill, who said with regard to the UK vis-à-vis Europe, we are with it, we are not of it, and you will be out of it if Brexit is adopted. So out of it means that we have to defend our interests. I'm sure that we'll do it.
Is it me?
No, first Ireland, then you.
Encore. I'd like to direct a question here really to the Commission. Will the Commission be able to handle this negotiation in the time frame that's there? It took you 5 years to conclude the Canadian agreement, where I think only 10% of mutual trade was involved. Here we're going to be dealing with a trade agreement with Britain where 50% of the trade is involved. So a much wider range of subjects are going to have to be covered in this negotiation. Is it possible for the Commission to do this within the 2-year frame? Secondly, will you be insisting that Britain give an undertaking during that 2-year period that they do not change in any way any of the EU legislation that they've already enacted under directives and regulations? And that continues to be the case, that EU standards in all the matters where we might be trading will be maintained and not changed, and that the UK will commit itself to agree anytime we change the rules within the European Union that they will change them as well, so that there is no attempt being made to undercut EU exports or products on the basis, for example, of more lax environmental regulations being allowed in the UK than are allowed in the rest of the Union. What line will the Commission take on our behalf in this negotiation? I also would have to say to my colleagues that I can understand, the other agreements that you want to make with Vietnam and a number of other countries that you listed there, which are much higher priorities. But for the sake of my country, we can't afford there not to be some sort of relationship established between Britain and the European Union, because our involvement with the British market is so great. So I'm having to say to my colleagues that you're just going to have to scrap all these other agreements from our sake, for our point of view anyway, and however annoyed we may be about it, we're going to have to make some sort of an agreement with the British on this. But I think it's important that they do not be allowed to make any regulatory undercutting of the rest of us, availing of their decision to leave to take advantage of those who've remained.
Can you specifically answer those two? And then Lord Lamont has to answer about 16 other ones. So please, to EU institutions, to that.
What I see is that since Great Britain is not any longer in the European Union, they get more speaking time.
To themselves.
Yep. Have you also noticed that?
I'm noticing you're all getting way too much speaking time.
Okay. Now, the questions that John is putting, first of all, I mean, if you have Article 50, it's 2 years, and under Article 50, you would be negotiating a lot of things, and one part of that would be a free trade agreement. It would be part of the Article 50 negotiation, but that part would, of course, follow the normal negotiating procedure that we have for free trade agreements. I mean, look at the agreement with Ukraine, for example, and that's a comprehensive agreement, but 90% of it is a free trade agreement, and that has been negotiated by the Commission. So we would, in fact, tap in the system of 50, but in an autonomous way. That's what would really happen. Is it feasible in 2 years? But where I disagree with quite a lot of people around the table is that they say, look, we would have other priorities. That I don't believe. The new relationship with Great Britain would be the priority. From a political point of view, I believe that would be the case. Whether that would make us easier in the negotiation, that's something completely different, because I have been negotiating a number of free trade agreements, and it's the Commission that is negotiating, but they all the time are looking at the member states whether they are backed or not, because we are not just doing it alone. We need to be backed by the member states, and then all kinds of problems that have been raised here on the table would come up. So is that possible technically in 2 years? Yes, probably, but I think politically that would not be the case. But it would certainly be the priority. Whatever has been said by anybody here around the table, that's what would mushroom in a political way, I think, from the day to tomorrow. Now, the question on the standstill, yes, that's what you do. I mean, in fact, with all countries you are negotiating with, what you do not accept is that they change the game when you are negotiating. So this would be a starting point, that you have a standstill. That's what you, in fact, are asking for, John. That would be. I mean, if you don't have that, I mean, then it would be quite impossible to get to whatever agreement. Now, let me add that one of the arguments that your Prime Minister has been using is that it would give. That you would in fact then have more possibilities to negotiate free trade agreements with other countries, citing India and China. That has been said. Exactly. Now, I know those negotiations, and up to now we have said we do not start free trade negotiations with China, because even, and Eva knows that, even the negotiation on an investment agreement with market access doesn't work. And what you see is that China becomes more and more difficult. I see no reason that all of a sudden you would make an interesting free trade agreement, although we do not manage to have a decent investment agreement with that. And finally, on India, that's a very interesting topic for you, because we were very close to have an agreement with India.
Not one I've made.
No, but we were out. I mean, I've done the negotiations with India. And we were very close, except for 2 points. One was on car parts, but the second one was on the cut-off price for wine and spirits, And that was about Scotch whiskey. That's what it was about, the cut-off price. From what price on can you export without supplementary taxes Scotch whiskey to India? Now, I can assure you that this is a non-starter, certainly with this government, even with the previous government, because you never agreed, Great Britain, including Scotland, to the cut-off price because they thought it was too high. No? And the Indians, they want to protect, let's say, the cheaper products, and you want to export the more expensive products. No? But on the cut-off, you never agreed with the European Union what would be the case,
Lord Lamont, have at it.
Well, thank you very much. Large number of points there. In his first intervention, Mr. De Gucht said, I had no idea what the consequences of Brexit were. Possibly, but may I suggest that he doesn't either. This will be determined by customers, it will be determined by markets. One of the illusions that hangs over the whole European debate is that trade flows are dictated by politicians, by governmental arrangements, that somehow tariffs are much lower than they were, that somehow trade flows are altered by politicians' political arrangements. Unfortunately, business has absorbed a lot of this mythology as well. It wasn't tariffs that made the City of London the capital of the Eurodollar trade internationally in the 60s and the 70s. It happened because London was entrepreneurial. A lot of people outside the United States wanted to organize their business in London. It was to some extent a consequence of over-regulation in the United States, which led people to go offshore And just as the City of London was the offshore centre to the United States in the 60s and 70s, I believe the City of London could still be the offshore centre to Europe. And Europe might attempt to pass laws, just as the United States attempted to pass laws. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that they would be effective. London has many attractions. The fact that it's got a long history in financial services, has many established financial institutions, obviously the English language, the time zone, the regulatory environment. London has a lot of comparative advantages. I don't believe that simply, because a lot of people around this table in a room say, oh, we are not going to allow London to be the financial centre for Europe. Well, it won't be determined by you. You may make a desperate attempt to sabotage London if you want, if you really think that's a wise thing to do. Switzerland is outside the EU. Switzerland, of course, does not have full passporting. It does have some passporting for some aspects of insurance, but Swiss banks, of course, they face a higher cost of incorporation, but Swiss banks are pretty successful within the EU. And I notice within the financial services industry in London, quite divided attitudes. On the one hand, you have all the speeches attempting to chill the blood, such as we've had echoed here today. But many people, a lot of the fund managers are very keen and believe that they could do with less regulation, and a lot of them very keen to move to Switzerland. I don't believe that anyone can be prescriptive about exactly what is going to happen. I was accused in the contributions that were made before of cherry picking, but it seems to me the very people who were accusing me of cherry picking were doing cherry picking from their side. They were saying you can't do this, you can't have agriculture, you can't have the city, you've got to have everything together. But at the same time, they were saying, we will have access to your market, we will have access to you on services as well, and on agriculture, and on manufacturing. It seems to me that everything is actually interrelated, but obviously in a negotiation, there will be attempts to look at each item by itself. The point was made, and I think it's subsequently been rebutted from within this gathering, that really an arrangement between the EU and the UK, something could just be left, it could be put on the back burner. It wasn't a high priority, really. Your largest trading partner is not a higher priority than Indonesia or Japan. I find that quite difficult to believe. I find it very difficult to believe for a country like Germany, as I've said repeatedly before, your largest customer for motor cars, your largest customer for manufacturers. I'm grateful to John Bruton for bringing out the point about 2 years. That's what we would expect, that things would remain the same for 2 years. A lot of the hysteria, a lot of the blood chilling might actually calm down in 2 years' time.
Thank you.
If you get an agreement at the end of the 2 years, but that's not assured.
It's not assured. Nothing is certain.
Now, I'd like to hear from Spain, Sweden, and Poland. We're running to the end of the session, and so rather brief comments there, and then we can talk about in this charred mess of lack of love, where a deal might begin to be structured, what could be picked up from this that could move forward, assuming any kind of time frame. Obviously, we assume it will be difficult. Obviously, we assume your priorities and focus will change. But obviously, as you also mentioned, Britain will remain politically a fundamental interest of Europe. At the same time, that's a fact. And so if we can begin from that, but first I'd like to hear from Spain, Sweden, and Poland rather briefly so that we can end the session. All right.
Well, two brief comments. The first is that I'm still surprised. I mentioned that you focus on retaliation, now you have added sabotage. Frankly, I mean, I haven't heard from the other interlocutors anything that just would justify speaking about sabotage. No, you have, this is your words, not mine. Your word, sabotage. When you mentioned, yes, when you said that we were telling you that you were cherry picking, which is right, that in fact what you saw from this side, you mentioned, I think, it was an attitude of sabotage on certain areas. And because I suppose that because we said that maybe it would be difficult to explain to car producers or to, it's not sabotage, it's just explaining, or spare part producers of cars in Spain, this agreement. But this is my first comment, and I think that if we, I hope we never are in real terms negotiating Brexit. But if we do, I think that we have to try to make it happen, because what you are absolutely right is that this is not a priority. It's the über alles priority would be for the European Union. Of course, we are interlinked and we cannot live without it. So we would be interested. As I say, I hope we are in a purely hypothetical case. But the second issue that I would like you to respond is to what the Commission asked you. 50% of your trade is with third countries. What we call today third countries that would not be third countries, would be interlocutors for you. How do you think, do you really expect to get the same conditions that the European Union gets in their negotiation, has got in their negotiations? How do you expect this to happen? Because this will also affect. So I conclude by saying that, again, I hope we are just discussing a hypothesis that will never happen, but you have to tell, and this is a common, a common duty for all the opinion makers. You have to tell the real terms of all this. That cherry picking, it's not possible. That it will be a long and difficult priority for all of us, but long and difficult negotiations, and that then you have to negotiate 50% of your trade outside that, just being the UK. My last comment on security. Well, NATO is there, but NATO is not just, it cannot encompass all the issues. It does not encompass. If you read NATO treaty, it's a specialized, it's defense. Security today goes far beyond NATO. And yes, we would establish cooperation. Of course we would. It is in our common interest. But once again, today, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day of no cooperation or lack of cooperation or worse cooperation in security matters. Even one hour, probably.
Okay, great. Briefly, from Sweden, Poland, and then the Netherlands in 2 minutes would be great, and then we're going to wrap this up. And by the way, in the last panel, building on what Anna said, I think rightly, yes, we understand their hard feelings, and it's going to be much tougher than perhaps the British thought. I get that. But can we then move on and talk about common interests, and since all this is going to be based on them? Let's be realists. You have interests, they have interests. What can be worked out relatively easily? What won't be worked out relatively easily because of differing interests? That could begin to flesh that out, and we go, because I think that's where you've taken us, which is fine. But then let's move forward and ground that in policy. What interest do you have to reach a deal with them on goods in Britain? Is it different than a deal on services? Can you disaggregate that? What do you want, and what do they want? Over to Sweden, and then Poland, then the Netherlands, then we'll give Lord Lamont probably about a minute and a half.
Well, my comment maybe is the first step into that.
Okay.
Because I was going to say that let's assume that some time has passed by. We have calmed down. We behave like good parents, as you said, and realize that UK is our best friend and when it comes to liberal countries. And of course, we will try to put a lot of efforts into a negotiation with you. And exactly as Karel said, that of course it will be the top priority, together with many other things. I was just more trying to explain that maybe it's not the same feeling for all the member states. But we will try our very best, and as we do with Norway, we try to facilitate as much as we can for them. And I'm sure that the Netherlands also will go together with us and try to find good solutions. But it will be tough, and we don't know yet where it's going to end.
Thank you. Brief intervention from Poland and the Netherlands.
Well, I repeat, the common interest for the remaining members is to deter other exits. And this should have an impact on the terms Britain gets. should not be too generous.
A very interesting point to bring up. We can't make this be too nice or others might leave. Finally, the Netherlands, before we give Lord Lamont the last word.
The distinction between this morning is that this morning we had a lively and very constructive debate, and we were then sometimes blaming our citizens that they are irrational about immigration or whatsoever. What I see now is that we have here a very annoyed and rather irrational debate, and it will be our citizens that will ask us to be practical in order to deal with things. But it's important to note that at the political area, there will come in a lot of irrationality because there will be a lot of disappointment. So from that point of view, all the political solutions will probably be suboptimal from a rational point of view. But then if we consider that the Dutch citizens are disappointed but not stupid, they want to work in the UK, and we want to have all these financial experts to serve our new financial capital, etc. So we have some areas to negotiate. We would welcome, of course, the UK to be part of the free trade agreement that we make with South Korea. I don't think that the UK will make a better deal on its own. So there are a lot of documents that you can sign and where you can benefit from. This is not a negotiating, but it's a practical fact that in your interest, like Switzerland and Norway, you can sign all these documents without having any influence on it, if that is your choice. Because it is suboptimal, but it's still better than not to be. So on the financial sector, I'm not sure if the Swiss are altogether, they are flourishing, but they are not always happy that some other countries put a lot of pressure on them when it comes to transparency, etc., and when that is regulated outside of your country. And what I doubt, but this is a question to you, Norman, do you think that the Brits have the kind of modesty of the Swiss and the Norwegians to accept what is regulated in Europe as the rules of the game in order to serve the benefits to serve the interests of your citizens?
No, the answer to that is no, and that's why we're having the negotiation. You're absolutely right to make the point that there is a great difference in the atmosphere between this session and the one before. Because in the one before, you were trying to prevent something happening and you were being very friendly. In this one, you're trying to conceal your irritation that something has happened and you're being less accommodating and less constructive. And
that's life.
It was a war game.
That's indeed, as you say. Yeah. And when someone said, I think it was you, John, had we realized things would be really this tough? I think we understood perfectly well, do understand what it would be like outside and what the attitude will be. But we believe that market forces, rather than people sitting behind desks, determine where customers go. I thought it was very revealing about the psychology of this meeting, what our Polish colleague said. You mustn't be too generous because others might follow. I thought this was a voluntary club based on harmony, peace, good neighborliness, keeping everyone together. That's what I thought it was all about. But now it seems we need a bit of stick.
You seem to be off
in order to keep the club together. On free trade areas, and the point was raised by our Spanish colleague, but I think was very well answered by our Dutch colleague. The free trade areas with third parties would remain. We would hope that we would intend that for the 2-year period, certainly, they would remain as they are. This is really a matter between us and those countries, whether they wish to continue them with us or not. I can't really see why it should concern people round this table. I would guess that most of them would actually want them to continue. Lastly, the point was made about security, and I think points were made about terrorism. I would imagine that on essentially policing matters, intelligence matters, cooperation would continue exactly as now. I mean, I think you don't need to have a supranational organization. People were talking this morning about internationalism, as though internationalism always required a supranational body as opposed to cooperation. Police forces, security services, perfectly capable of cooperating on an anti-terrorist set of measures, and intelligence sharing, insofar as it happens within the EU, I think would continue. Police information being shared would continue. But when I talked about foreign and security policy this morning, I think it was Mr. Kampeter who said I hadn't given enough detail. Well, I didn't give a lot of detail because I was making a proposal that I thought was a constructive proposal, one that I thought might be welcome, but it obviously is something that has to be negotiated. It's something where I thought maybe we could be of assistance. I didn't want to sound patronizing anyway, but I thought we might be able to be of some added value to the EU, even an EU without Britain. Britain, being a country with a lot of global ties and with a lot of representation on international bodies, and a country that has been more prepared than some European countries to use its armed forces elsewhere in the world. I thought this would be something that we could talk about, that could be something positive for Europe, and it would mean that even if our relationship economically was just based on free trade, our political cooperation, our attempts to give Europe a profile in the world would continue. And lastly, I repeat, I am not cherry picking. It seems to me the other side is cherry picking.
The stronger side is always, cherry picking is for the stronger to do. So it is not up to you.
Okay. Everyone states what they want in totality and implies what happens part by part.
But would you agree that it's more about our cherries than about yours?
One sentence.
Okay, we literally have time for one sentence from Poland and France, both of whom have their hands up.
I have to put it quite bluntly. What I meant is that
Well, very blunt anyway.
terms which we get should not encourage awful populist forces in some countries which are campaigning on exit, like National Front in France or Podemos in Spain. And this is a very important consideration. This is in the interest of Europe, so that you are not you do not encourage other
That's a good point
countries.
to throw in. Yes, France.
I think that this referendum endangers the Union. It will weaken the Union if Brexit is adopted. But perhaps there is a chance to have a financial city inside the Eurozone, a strong digital market, and perhaps it's a bet, it's a blessing for us. But also for France, it's a new responsibility because we will be the only European Union country at the UN Council of Security Council. Big responsibility.
And on that note, as we're concluding now in the last session, having built on this, let's talk in a very hardcore way about interests. Given where you are and what you've said, where your common interests lead to there being some parts of a deal that can be negotiated relatively quickly, I think this would be a service, and parts of a deal which you've indicated there would not be a commonality of interest that would do that as well. I think beginning to flesh that out in a less bumper sticker way would be very, very helpful in building on that. So if we can do that in the last session, that would be great.